I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the NFL. There was some sad news coming out recently. The man here on the right is Dwight Clark. Now, Dwight Clark is a 49ers favorite, San Francisco 49ers favorite from the 70s and 1980s. And he was probably best known for his dramatic catch from a pass from Joe Montana in the 1981 NFC Championship game between the 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys. And this game is often seen as the passing of the torch between the NFC dominance of the Cowboys in the 1970s and the eventual dominance of the 49ers of the 1980s. Dwight Clark seemed to be just that passing of the torch, so to speak. But he was a fine wide receiver and player. Gale Sayers is a legend on the left. Gale Sayers, had it not been for injuries, the type of injuries that Gale Sayers had in today's advanced technology and medical professions and surgeries and what forth, his career probably would have been able to go on, and Gale Sayers might have gone down as the greatest running back of all time, famous for the 6 touchdowns in one game. Well, both these men are now facing some of the negative consequences of giving us so much brilliance. Gale Sayers has dementia. He's 73 years old. He's been suffering from dementia for quite some time, from what I can understand. Dwight Clark revealed this weekend that he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS. One thing that cannot be denied anymore, you look at the WWE, and you look at how many athletes, if it's not a death from steroids or steroids related illnesses such as enlarged hearts or heart disease or liver disease or what have you, if it's not that, then you see behaviors that mimic sociopathic or psychotic behavior. There was a wrestler that died just a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. I can't remember his name, but he was a big guy, 300 pounds, and he was suspected of killing a person before. And I think he was under investigation for a possible other homicide around the time that he died. And then you look at Chris Benoit, and you look at, the other guy. Oh, what was his name? It was a wrestler from the early 1990s that was murdered. Dino Bravo. You look at a guy like Dino Bravo, and you look at these other guys that have had this history of violence. And what comes to mind is the disease that Nigerian doctor portrayed by Will Smith in that movie. Great movie. You wonder if CTE is involved. To me, it's a no-brainer. Pardon the pun. It's a no-brainer. From what I also understand, CTE can sometimes mimic ALS. Not to say that ALS isn't the correct diagnosis here, but then you look at all these people. Just think about it. ALS is a relatively, I'm not going to say it's a rare disease, but it's not that common, right? Lou Gehrig's disease. How many NFL players, just think about it, guys. How many NFL players have we seen in wheelchairs in their 40s and 50s dying of ALS in the past 20 years? Quite a few. It's been quite a few. I can't name them off the top of my head. They were most of them weren't that high profile. But I know one of them played with the Baltimore Ravens died a few years ago. Okay, the article I'm looking at right here. O.J. Brigance, Steve Gleason. Okay. Kevin Turner, another guy that I mentioned, actually had CTE and not ALS after the autopsy. But there's something wrong here. Football is creating, or at least partially to blame for some of these illnesses that these individuals are starting to have as they get older. You hear about the suicides of a guy like Dave Durison, all right, and Junior Seau. And you know something is seriously wrong. There's something damaging the brains of these NFL players. And that's one of the things, you know, guys, like, I always was recruited to play football when I was younger, right? People always wanted me to play football. And I recognized the pros and cons, even then when I was 18, 19 years old, of trying to play football. And I decided not to play football because, yeah, there was that chance that I could make it big and become a multi-millionaire, play professionally maybe. There's that chance. But what I was concerned about was I was looking at people on television like John Mackey. John Mackey was a very verbose and eloquent man when I used to grow up watching him. And then all of a sudden I remember I stopped seeing him on ESPN Classic, talking about classic moments with the Baltimore Colts, I think it was who he played with. And all of a sudden I remember seeing him on television and he was not in his right mind anymore. He had dementia. And he was just repeating the same phrases like, go long, John, go long. And that's all he would keep. He would say things like that. I'm like, and I've seen other instances of players with dementia or brain damage, and I was thinking to myself, well, what are the pros and cons of playing football like that? I mean, on a daily basis, like, football is a fun game to play, but can you imagine how many times you get hit in the head, especially on defense? All that banging and pounding, not only during the regular game, but during practices, scrimmages, playoffs, year in and year out. If you played football ever since you were a kid, all the way to professional ranks, that's 20 plus years of getting hit in the fucking head over and over and over and over and over and over again. Like one doctor says, like being in 100 car accidents? No. I was like, no. And maybe I'm not a multi-millionaire, but I can speak clearly. I don't slur my words. And I have at least most of my marbles. And I see some people who play professional sports and they are in their mid-40s and they're walking like they're 78 years old. You already hear about Brett Favre, who is still a relatively young man. He's only 47 years old. And he talks about how he has significant memory loss. He will be in conversations and he'll forget about what he was talking about. And Brett Favre is one of those guys I'm going to have to watch, because I think Brett Favre, guys, might be... And and please don't tell, I'm not trying to, I don't wish this on anybody, but I know how many times Brett Favre got hit, and Brett Favre played a very long time, and Brett Favre played in the era where there wasn't this protection of players from concussions, and he admitted that there were many games where he had concussions and he never told anybody. And I think Brett Favre might end up being one of those high-profile persons who we have to watch out for. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, man. I hope he lives a very long life and keeps his mind right, and I hope he lives to be in his 90s or 100 years old. But I'm scared for Brett Favre because I see what's going on with these other guys, and he didn't play as long as Brett Favre did. So that's all I got to say about this, man. I'm just really saddened to hear about these two individuals, Gale Sayers and Dwight Clark. Gale Sayers is well into his battle with dementia. Dwight Clark is just beginning his battle. ALS is usually a fatal disease. There's been pretty much one exception to this rule, to the point where some doctors even wonder if he truly does have ALS. And of course, that's Dr. Stephen Hawking, the famous the hell is he anyway? Physicist, I think. Dr. Hawking was diagnosed with ALS when he was 21 years old. I think he was in college. What college did he go to? Cambridge? When he was diagnosed, he was 21 years old, and usually ALS patients die between 2 to 5 years of diagnosis. And Stephen Hawking is still alive more than 50 years later, to the point where his disease no longer is progressing. Of course, he can't move. He breathes through a ventilator. He's the guy who talks through that voice machine. Everybody always hears, I believe that guy, right? But he's still alive. His mind is sound. He's imprisoned in that body, but his mind is sound. And I know this sounds cruel, or maybe some people disagree with me, but I'd rather have Stephen Hawking's fate. I'd rather have my mind sound in a body that I can't move than be in a physical, strong body with my mind clouded and decayed. I mean, I don't know, but I don't know, man. I'm even rambling a little bit now, but tell me what you guys think, man. I mean, do you think that football's to blame for this? Because I feel like this. Yeah, at this point, football shares a lot of responsibility for these players, but these things weren't known at the time that these players were playing, that football caused these amount of injuries or these long-term problems. Football did not know that. So I know that a lot of these players and their families of players, they want compensation. I mean, on the one hand, I think the NFL does share some type of responsibility because their profession did lead to this. You know what I mean? I try to compare it to like when workers who've been working in asbestos-related or asbestos infested warehouses for decades, and then the employees get sick and die of lung disease or lung cancer or whatever. And then I think that these companies do owe these families some type of monetary compensation. But the NFL didn't know about it. So it's like, I don't know. I guess with the amount of money the NFL makes, they could give these families something. But I don't know. That's for a person who's an expert in legalistics and things of that nature. But tell me what you guys think.